Welcome to Baha'i Chat, a conversation series dedicated to our interconnectedness. I'm Layli Maparyan, and on behalf of David Hoffman, who usually introduces the program but is on vacation this month, I welcome you. Each weekly session is rooted in the Baha'i writings and the fundamental teachings of the oneness of God, religion, and humanity, led by people who are putting these principles into action. This week, we have a panel, and it is the first in our three-part series of curated conversations on racial justice. Baha'is believe that we are living in the great day of God foretold by each of God's previous messengers who have established the major world religions. All of these divine educators are connected. Their message is progressive, always leading mankind forward to new levels of unity. Each has been a bearer of a preordained message essential for these times. God's latest manifestation, the founder of the Baha'i faith, is Baha'u'llah. This is an Arabic title meaning the glory of God. Baha'u'llah appeared in Iran in the middle of the 19th century, bringing an unprecedented volume of teachings with the overarching and essential mission of the unification of the entire human race, a reality promised in the scriptures associated with each of God's former prophets. One of the most important principles of the Baha'i faith is justice in all its forms, including racial justice. There is no doubt that we are living in very trying times, times of growing friction and disunity, times foretold in the holy scriptures of all faith traditions, times that would precede the ultimate gathering together of humankind. It can be hard to believe that we are headed in the direction of justice and unity now, but Baha'is believe firmly that we are and are working towards these ends. Today, we will be speaking about an important message from the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States, the governing body of the U.S. Baha'i community, to the people of the United States. This message was written in response to the massive racial justice uprisings that have occurred in recent months, and its title is Forging a Path to Racial Justice. It's no coincidence that this message was offered to our national community on Juneteenth. It is this message that we'll be discussing today. Joining me today for this conversation are my co-host, Masud Olufani, along with Ymasumac Maran and Anthony Outler. After introducing ourselves, Ymasumac will offer a prayer and then I'll hand it over to Masud. As I stated at the outset, my name is Layli Maparyan, and I'm a member of the Baha'i community of Framingham, Massachusetts. I'm also the executive director of the Wellesley Centers for Women at Wellesley College, where I'm also professor of Africana Studies. For the last several years, I've been working in the area of racial justice discourse, particularly as it relates to womanism and the Baha'i faith. So now, Masud, turn it over to you for your self-introduction.
My name is Masud Olufani. I am based in Atlanta, Georgia, a member of the Baha'i community in Atlanta, a longtime member of the Baha'i community in Atlanta. I'm also a multidisciplinary artist, actor and writer. Fancy way of saying that I just like to stay busy, so I stay out of trouble. Good to see everybody. Looking forward to the conversation.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ymasumac Maran. My ancestry is from the Quechua people of Bolivia on my father's side, and on my mother's side, from New England, Irish and English. Ancestors came 2 years after the Pilgrims. I grew up in a small village in southern Mexico, so I always say soy mexicana de corazón. And I also am an educator, a writer, intuitive healing coach. Yeah, so I think like Masud, I like to stay busy. And I currently live in Santa Cruz, California.
Hello, everybody. My name is Anthony Outler, born and raised in the great city of Atlanta, Georgia, down here with my brother, Masud. I was actually raised in the Baptist church. Those were my roots. And I became Baha'i at the age of 16 years old. I am an educator. I've been in education for about 18 years now, serving in the classroom as a history teacher, also a social and emotional learning coach at one point, and I currently serve as an assistant principal. And so I always tell people, my work in education is simply an extension, of my activist work. And so, I try to incorporate, education for transformation, education for individuals to know themselves and to be able to transform their communities. And so glad to be here with everyone. Looking forward to the dialogue.
¿Quién libra de las dificultades? Salvo Dios. Di, alabado sea Dios. Él es Dios. todos somos sus siervos, y todos atenemos a su mandato. Is there any remover of difficulty? Save God. Say praise be God. He is God. All are his servants, and all abide by his bidding.
Thank you, Ema. That was beautiful. I didn't know you could sing like that, girl. I had to call you out the box now, man. I got something I need done, man, on the singing front. I'm gonna have to give you a call. Very nice, very nice. Well, it's so good to be here with family and friends. Here in the global world community, we are one human family. So it is good to be able to spend time with my family who is here on this in this discussion, joining me in this discussion, and also for the extended family who's joining us as audience. So so happy to be here with you. Against the backdrop of the recent events that have stirred up this kind of national reckoning with the history of racial injustice, we recently received this clarifying letter from the for the American Baha'i community from the National Spiritual Assembly of the American Baha'is. And it's such a wonderful letter because I think it so clearly diagnoses the problem that we are dealing with and grappling with and have been historically grappling with. Talks about the moment that we're in, which is a precious opportunity to really make some substantive change, and then provides us with a number of steps that we can take as a community, both within the context of the Baha'i community and joining with our friends and fellow workers who are not Baha'is, but who share this kind of commitment to this really, really important cause. And this letter there's so many different areas that we can jump in just to kind of stimulate this conversation and get it going. And as I was reading through it the last couple of days and just trying to find the right spot to begin, I was drawn to the third paragraph down on this letter, which begins with, it talks about this idea of creating a society that's built around oneness and justice. So I just wanted to begin by reading that and use that as a space for us to kind of move into and begin our conversation as a panel. So this paragraph begins: to create a just society begins with recognition of the fundamental truth that humanity is one. But it is not enough simply to believe this in our hearts. It creates the moral imperative to act and to view all aspects of our personal, social, and institutional lives through the lens of justice. It implies a reordering of our society more profound than anything we have yet achieved. And it requires the participation of Americans of every race and background. For it is only through such inclusive participation that new moral and social directions can emerge. And I just want to throw that out to my friends here on this panel and just see what you're thinking as we kind of lead into the discussion on this really important letter.
Yeah, I just, this is one of my favorite quotes. And, I apologize. I was remiss in my introduction to just acknowledge, the land that we're on. In a virtual space, it's kind of interesting because everyone's in a different place. However, what's really wonderful about where you are, wherever you are, is that what we know is that the original caretakers of that land have been here for over 10,000 years. And so I always want to acknowledge that, because everything I see that's beautiful, when I look out my window, when I walk down the street and I see a tree or I see a mountaintop, I know that someone took care of that. And I'm very grateful and I'm very honored to be able to walk on this land at this time. I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that out loud. But I in terms of this quote, this quote from me, I so appreciate it, because often I think we shy away from statements that say humanity is one, because I think we're afraid that it's going to become something like colorblind. And I understand that fear. However, I think what this quote asks us to do, or this paragraph asks us to do, is to then say, okay, now that you understand this concept, how is everything in your life changing? Because everything in your life should change if you truly understand the oneness of humanity, right? Your friendships, your thoughts, and I think most importantly, your heart. Because one of the things that I think about when I think about social justice is that there are two lenses that we should always be looking through. There's an individual lens and there's an institutional lens. Now, the institutional is one that's public and that everyone sees. And we're seeing that today, right? We're seeing that with the reorganization of, the police department. We're seeing that with all these, demonstrations. And this is wonderful. And we saw this also in the 60s, right? And this civil unrest, right? And it's this reimagining, this reordering of these social structures. And it has to happen, right? Because we know that they were built on a standard that was not just, right? So this is the institutional level. But at the individual level, which is one that I look at more often, because this is the one that's not always seen, is in your heart. And in your heart is where your prejudices lie, is where your biases lie, right? And if we don't equally and systematically examine that aspect of who we are, then we're in danger of rebuilding systems that will reflect what's in our hearts, right? Because systems only reflect, institutions only reflect the hearts of the individuals that built it, right? And so this has to be constantly and continuously purged of any biases, prejudices that it carries in. And those things often are very subtle and are very quiet, even to the owner, right? Even I don't know. And so I have to always be mindful of what's going on in my heart. And for me, what I focus on is love, because if I don't fall in love with you, then I'm in danger of carrying and harboring something in my heart against you. And I have to constantly purge that out, right? So for me, this quote then, or this paragraph then, really holds us accountable to both of those, right? It's not enough to say humanity is one. What are you doing about it then, if you truly believe that, right?
Absolutely, Ema. I was drawn to the same part of the quotation here. You mentioned this whole idea of the personal work that has to happen, the internal work that has to happen. The quotation in the letter, it says, it implies a reordering of society more profound than anything we have yet achieved. And we think about the reordering of society, we have to take a few steps back and begin with the reordering of self, right? Reordering of how we're thinking. And that requires a reckoning and a truth telling in terms of understanding how we have been inflicted by the ideology of white supremacy and how it impacts the way we think and function and navigate our society. And so the reordering has to occur with ourselves, right? How we see ourselves in relation to other people, how we interact, how we engage in our work, every aspect of our lives. And we have to be involved in this work as we, reorder ourselves to rewrite these scripts, right? Because we've all been socialized with these scripts about who people are. Scripts, that are laced with, anti-Black sentiment. And so we have to come to a reckoning with that in order for us to then be able to see ourselves as one human family, right? We talk about it all the time. But again, if we haven't done that work, then these just become slogans, right? We specialize in sloganizing, we're all one people, and people kind of lean on these things, which then prevents them from looking at the reality and seeing the reality for what it is and acting upon it. And so this reordering, I think, of ourselves is key as people think about reordering the society. Sometimes we start outward, but we got to look within first in order for sustained change to happen.
I completely agree. And I would just add to that by pointing out that right now, oppositionality is one of the main structures of our society that's preventing us from moving forward. We are built on a philosophical and political orientation towards dividing people into groups, deciding that one of those groups is superior and one of those groups is inferior, and then pitting them against each other in perpetual contest. You know, our whole culture is based on creating division, creating hierarchy, and creating contest. And the idea of unity is the opposite of all of those things. You know, the idea of unity is more about understanding each other as kindred. And what does it take at the heart level, to go back to Ema's comment, to get us to think about feeling kinship with everyone we meet, even people who have different ideas or different ways of life, and figuring out how we can invite others to feel kinship with us as well. You know, I know that the problems that we face with regard to racial injustice are grave, they are life-threatening, but they are in fact rooted in an understanding of divide, create hierarchy, and you know, pit people against each other. And that's the very thing we have to overcome. Part of the inner work is finding those inner resources that we have to go against that and think of everyone as kindred.
Wow, that's a lot of thoughtful responses to that quote. I'm wondering, you know, in the wake of the deaths that recently occurred, whether it's Ahmaud Arbery, Brother Brooks, the other people, male and female, who have died, and not just those who have died recently, right, but those who have died historically, right? We're talking about 401 years of sustained multi-generational trauma against Black bodies in public and private spaces, right? And so in a very real sense, these deaths today are very much tied to that history, that tradition, right, of trauma visited upon the black body. But I'm thinking, you know, the protests that came as a result, right? And I think it was Dr. King that once said that protests or a riot or protests are the voices of the unheard, right? People who have traditionally not been heard, demanding to be heard, right? And we know that that peaceful protest within the context of the Baha'i faith is just, is something that's held up as an honorable thing to be engaged in. But we also know that protest is not enough. That's not going to get us where we need to go. And I'm wondering about, you know, in this next part of the letter, it talks about, it says, whatever immediate results might come from the current demonstrations, the elimination of racism will require a sustained and concerted effort. It is one thing to protest against particular forms of injustice. It is far more profound challenge to create a new framework for justice. Our efforts can only succeed when we learn to build relationships with each other based on sincere friendship, regard, and trust, which in turn become pillars for the activities of our institutions and communities. And, you know, as a Baha'i community, as a global Baha'i community, we're involved in this institute process, this community building initiative, right? That engages these kind of what we call core activities, junior youth empowerment workshops, children's classes, devotional gatherings, which are all centered around strengthening our community spiritually and building sincere relationships. And I'm just wondering, in light of this quote that I just shared, and we're talking about protests, you know, not being enough to get us where we need to go, to get us to the beloved community, right? That we are all supposed to be engaged in bringing about. What are you all thinking about the very real and practical applications of these initiatives in terms of building that beloved community and giving birth and rise to these institutions that will fundamentally transform our nation as it concerns racial justice?
I can start with there's a talk I was listening to recently by Stokely Carmichael, Brother Kwame Ture. And in that speech, he was talking about there's a difference between mobilization and organization, right? And so what we've seen and what we continue to see in the wake of these tragic deaths of our brothers and sisters, we see these uprisings that occur. We see this mass mobilization, and that mass mobilization is necessary. The letter says, you know, it's not enough to believe this in our hearts. It creates some moral imperative to act. And so when people do arise, when people do take it to the streets, when people do, go out to make these demands, this is out of their moral commitment to act. But at the same time, we know that energy and that movement, as we're seeing now, right, we're witnessing a decrease in the amount of Facebook and Instagram posts. I know down here in Atlanta, we were seeing, marches almost daily for a while. People go out in the streets and doing these demonstrations. Again, it's necessary, but again, there's another piece to that. And so I'll just give a concrete example in terms of the way that I personally engaged, right? When we talk about this new framework for justice, I participated in a march and a protest rally in my local community. And when I went out there, I had a clipboard with me. It was me and about 7 other my Baha'i brothers and sisters, and we had a clipboard. And in the midst of going out and being involved and engaging with the activity, we were taking and collecting names, right? Names and email addresses of the people that were out there. And the conversation was just that. What you just shared from the message is that, it's one thing for us to get out here, and it's very important. But again, we have to continue the conversation, and we have to really be systematic because racism in and of itself is systematic. So we have to be systematic as well in our diagnosis and our actions to address it. And so we collected those names. And so the idea here is to keep these individuals engaged in conversation. And I also had a gathering, actually, in light of COVID, kind of limits our interaction, but a gathering in my driveway of neighbors, right, to come together to begin to talk. So the idea here is, if we want the change we want to see, if we can't first manifest that in our own families, right, which then in our own neighborhoods, then, how do we then seek to make this reordering of our society as a whole? And so just a couple of concrete examples in terms of, taking the energy of mobilization and looking at some systematic, organized ways that we can continue to forge relationships of trust between people, look at, lines of action that we could take, and then, and take those actions in our communities.
I love what you shared, Anthony. Do you have anything you want to follow up with on that, Layli?
Yes, I actually want to sort of bring in another part of the letter that I think relates to your question, because when we talk about a new framework for justice, one of the things that could mean that we often don't talk about is justice as inclusion, in the sense that, is it possible to achieve justice without having a social system that is radically inclusive of everyone? And we have to look at what are the impediments to radical inclusion in our society. One of the things that the letter refers to is the deeply entrenched notions of anti-Blackness that pervade our society. I think that that language is very important because it encourages us to look at every dimension, every aspect, every locale of our society, to notice where and how anti-Blackness shows up, and to eradicate it, to increase the ability to include everyone. I think about the logo for the Ruhi Institute, which, the logo is a group of people, including another person who's running up. And all of the people, even though you can see from the silhouette, each of them is different, bringing something different. It's a radically inclusive model. And in this society, the structures that we have that really uphold or sustain the systemic racism are structures that interfere with inclusion, that interfere with everyone participating, that interfere with access, and that perpetuate violence. And so it's that level that we have to do a fine-tooth combing of our own culture to eradicate that.
Yeah, these are such powerful examples, and I'm just so excited to hear. I'm going to take that idea of the outside having the gathering of neighbors.
Yeah, I was digging
have
that too.
virtual dinners, which I'll start there, but I like that.
I'll credit you, Anthony. I'll definitely credit you, man.
That's right. There's so many moments in this letter in which I so appreciate, and the one about building relationships is so key, because again, if I'm not, like, I always feel like institutions, yes, But at the very personal level, at a heart-to-heart level, if that doesn't shift, institutions is not going to hold up. You know, any institutional or structural change is not going to hold up if at the level of the heart we don't change. And so I feel like this letter is saying, what is this new framework for justice going to look like in which your heart has been transformed? And the way that you do that is by building a new community with your neighbors, right? And so for me, the Institute process really, it's not only an educational system in which we learn new concepts, but it also helps establish new patterns of behavior in your community, right? And it's these patterns of behavior that are centered around the spiritual concept of oneness, right? And so there's a community devotional that we have in one of our neighborhoods that I'm walking with a few friends in. And what's really beautiful is, first of all, the space was actually organized by a few of the families in this neighborhood. They said, you know, we need a space to come together and really like learn about this process of like change that the Institute is asking us to do, right? And so we said, okay, yeah, let's do that. And so we created this space. And so then, you know, COVID hit. We had a few in-person ones, and then COVID hit. And so then it became a virtual space, right? And it's now become this devotional community, right? It's like, it's a community devotional, right? And so these families all come together virtually. And what's been really interesting is the diversity that is in this devotional, right? We have the Black community present, we have the Latino community present, we have the Indigenous community present, and we have a wonderful friend from Nepal, and her family are beginning to also join, right? And then we have the Anglo community and the Persian community. They're all like just really present. And so this idea of, you know, learning to build relationships with each other, you know, how do we work together? How do we, you know, moving, you know, and really thinking about what does anti-Blackness look like in each of our communities, right? Because it's present in the Indigenous community, it's present in the Latino community, right? And how do we address that? It's something that, you know, with my Indigenous brothers and sisters, we've been thinking about, because there's a strong culture of respect towards elders. And so, you know, you don't want to correct your elder. At the same time, you know, anti-Blackness is just not okay. It's always been present. I heard it growing up, you know, and so how do you move away from that language and move away from that? Because language has power, right? Language establishes belief systems, establishes values, and it shapes your home, right? Who you marry, who's okay and who's not okay, who gets in this far into the circle and who gets in this far, right? I mean, language can actually do that, which is so astounding to me. So even just starting with language, but then of course going beyond language, and allowing belief to be reshaped, right? And so this is something that this group of diverse friends is really beginning to examine. By every single week, they get together every Thursday and we read a quote, we say prayers together, we learn together. What is remarkable is that amidst all this pain and all this difficulty, friends share their anxiety, their depression, you know, all of this is shared in the space. And amidst all of that, there's so much joy. There's so much love. In the end, we're laughing and we're having such a good time together. And so, you know, one of the things that makes me think of is, what is this new pattern that is being set in this neighborhood with this group of friends? And we don't know yet, right? Because it's emerging. I mean, you know, it's something that's just new for us. However, it's something that every individual in that space has expressed. This is a space that keeps me for the rest of the week until we meet again, right? And from there, of course, have been born, you know, other, you know, groups to study. We have, you know, study circles that want to learn about, you know, what is the, you know, life of the spirit? What is that about? Let's learn about what does it mean to be a spiritual being in a world that is material, right? And so like from this group have emerged other wonderful spaces in which we can get together during the week.
What Ima talked about, the way she described this particular activity, right? We talk about this framework for justice. We talk about these 4 activities that exist within the Baha'i framework for building community, devotional gatherings, youth groups, study circles. And she talked about this group, and I was listening because it was an initial focus on relationship building. Right, we're going to come together, diverse group of folk, to get to know each other, right?
Yeah.
You and I, Masud and I had a conversation with my dad the other day. We were just talking about, oneness, and right, and the necessities for oneness. And my dad was just like, look, one of the first things we have to do is talk to each other.
Yeah.
Right. Without even going into, all the theories and, all the stuff that's going on. It's like, hey, what's your name? Right. How many children do you have? Right. What are your likes and dislikes? What you like to watch on TV? What's your favorite movie? These types of conversations. And in addition to that, right, these people were also, praying together, right? They were having these devotional gatherings, and they're coming from different traditions. So I'm assuming that Ima may have shared a prayer or writing from the Baha'i tradition in Spanish, perhaps, right? And then maybe the Persian who was there, right? So there was this potential that this possibility that this space created for those relationships to happen, and then for people to connect hearts through prayer and devotion, connecting with the Most High. And then she's talked about the fact that there were these discussions about anti-Blackness. Things are beginning to be talked about within this space, right? That are in line with the current moment, because the space isn't just a space in and of itself just to pray. At the same time, those individuals are reading the reality of society, and looking at now, how do we take this spiritual entity, these relationships that we've garnered, and then translate that to action in the community, right? And so this, I think, is a key example, because within this framework for justice that we espouse, we have to be very deliberate and intentional about the way we engage them in order for them to address the most vital and challenging issue, right? Race, we got to have some real conversations within these spaces and applying these spiritual concepts to the alleviation of this issue. So I appreciate that example, Ima, just listening to you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and you bring up an interesting point, because I think inherent in what we're talking about, it seems to me, is that fundamentally is this building of meaningful relationships, right? Sincere relationships that are predicated on truthfulness and honesty. And that's in the letter that the National Spiritual Assembly sent. And, they talk about, one statement is, an essential element of the process will be honest and truthful discourse about current conditions and their causes and understanding. Now, we talk about these meaningful relationships built on, these sincere conversations, but that brings up something that is fundamentally a challenge for a lot of people, which is the associative discomfort that comes with engaging in these types of conversations. People are afraid to talk about the issue of race. People are afraid to talk about systemic injustice. They're worried that they might say the wrong thing. So how do we, thinking about, in the Baha'i context, Baha'i faith, truthfulness is the foundation of all human virtues, right? So we have to, every other virtue is predicated on the notion of truthfulness, on the spiritual law of truthfulness. So how do we muster the courage? How do we encourage one another to engage in these honest conversations that are truthful, that bring us back to reality, and we're not constantly skirting around the issue, ducking and diving, shucking and jiving, and never getting anywhere, but we're building those relationships on truthful, honest discourse. How do we get there, y'all? How do we get there?
May I just say one thing? Sorry, just from what Anthony shared and what you're asking right now. I think at its most basic level, and this may sound funny, but it's falling in love. We have to fall in love with each other, because when I fall in love with you, I will forgive you, right? If you offend me, I will forgive you, and I will come back to love, right? But if I don't love you, I'm gonna hold it against you. I'm gonna make stories about who I think you are. I'm gonna go down this road that I've gone down in the past, right? But with love present, then everything else can happen, right? These conversations can emerge, and we can love each other in the end, right? So I think, to me, what Anthony was describing, which thank you, and just it helped me think more about this space as well, is that at its most basic level, I think this framework for justice is asking us to fall in love. And when and in a very systematic way, which sounds really silly and interesting, because it's like, first of all, how can you just fall in love with all of humanity? And two, how can you do that systematically? But I think that's the deal, because there's, 7 billion people on this planet. I got to fall in love with y'all. right? Because at some point, we're gonna get real close and you might say something. And my job is whatever it is that you say to come back to love with you. Otherwise, it begins to create this even a little separation can very quickly in the environment that we're in, spread me out, right? And that can happen with a team that I'm working with, and it can happen with my neighbors. You know, it's so easy to make this happen so quickly, right? Because these forces of division are so strong. And so then the power of love has to be stronger. And so for me, the question, at a very practical way, I always ask myself in any space that I'm in, am I in love? Am I in love with every one of these members? Because if I'm not in love, then my job is to fall in love, right? Now, I don't know if they're in love with me, but that's not my job. My job is to fall in love with them, right? And so literally, I systematically in my mind, I go through all the people in the room and I'm like, how am I falling in love with them? What am I doing? And one of the things that you all mentioned was, who are you? Tell me your story, right? I want to know how you got here. How'd you get to today? Because I know how you got here to today had to have some stuff on the way, right? And I want to honor that. And so that's part of that walk. And that also asks for us to have an intimacy, right? At the very beginning, we begin to have an intimacy with each other. And that's what love is, right? It's intimacy. And so, these are, and when people aren't ready for that, because there are some friends that aren't ready, right? They don't want to have that kind of intimacy right away. That's okay. My job is to love them anyway. Right? And so then I just get to know who they are today. Maybe they don't want to tell me their story and their journey. That's all right. Just tell me about right now. Right? And right now I'm going to fall in love.
I completely agree with this methodology that both Ymasumac and Anthony have been talking about. And, it starts with a disposition at the beginning of your day when you put yourself in the position of looking at every person and saying, what do I like about this person? What do I find fascinating about this person? What do I want to compliment in this person? What do I want to share with this person? If you really start out with that kind of an orientation to the other human beings that you encounter each day, you will engage each person differently. You will find that you can have relationships with people that other people think are impossible because of the positive approach that you take from the beginning. And that approach might seem kind of out of kilter with the environment that we're in right now, particularly politically, but it's all the more disarming and all the more effective because of how distinctive it is as an approach. Every person is not only a potential friend, a potential intimate community member, but actually on the spiritual level already is. And we're really just trying to remove the layers that interfere with our natural connectedness with each person. It can be really, really challenging with those people who, for whatever reason, seem like they're opposed to us. But my own experience tells me that even those people are just really looking for connection and looking for support of who they are. And sometimes the simplest points of connection open up friendship. It's one of the things that I like about the National Center for Race Amity is they have all these stories documented of these cross-racial friendships between people coming from groups that you would think would never come together, yet they form these intimate bonds, often led to activism and all other kinds of racial justice and racial amity work. And it just reminds us that it's possible. We need those reminders that it's possible, and we need to help other people also feel that spark of the ability to become friends with people that they think it's impossible to be friends with. We can't stay in our heads. It has to be in our hearts. And there's so much in everyday life that we can look for, those kind of conversations that Anthony said that we need to have, those simple things that we need to do just to get to know people, or what Ymasumac said about, what it took you to get to this moment. Those are the things that really get the ball rolling and lead to unity. They fast track friendship. They fast track unity.
It makes me think of the Baha'i concept on unity, what unity looks like. It's not unity in sameness, which is oftentimes in our contemporary society is what people are really kind of more invested in. It's kind of how can we eliminate the differences, right? And so that we can have like a unity based on kind of a monochromatic kind of cultural kind of planing. And but the Baha'i concept is unity through diversity, unity in diversity, right? So that no matter where you come from, what background, you bring that to the table. And we celebrate, that variance of God's creation. And it seems to me, I know that, when I first became Baha'i, I've been a Baha'i now since 1992. And I know one of the first things that attracted me was that concept of unity and diversity and the notion of oneness, right? As it attracts a lot of people, because I think people are looking for spaces where they can feel that sense of community and kind of like, of diversity. But I didn't really fully understand. It took me a long time to kind of settle into it with a deeper awareness and a deeper understanding. And that's still evolving and unfolding, right? But when I began to understand it, not as theory, not as conjecture, but as something that is operating at the cellular, the spiritual, the molecular level, that we are all interconnected, then it made relating and having conversations with folks across cultural backgrounds, across ethnographic backgrounds, across, economic divides, what have you. This is my brother, this is my sister, this is my uncle, this is my aunt, this is my dad, this is my mom. We are one human family. And so I think internalization of that concept in a deep way, of that spiritual law, that spiritual reality, really helps us in terms of this community building and, and breaking down these barriers.
This idea of forming these friendships and relationships, right? And I'm gonna be honest with you, I used to really feel like, these were like weak ways of, confronting the issue of race and racial oppression, right?
Mm-hmm.
You see all these things going on and you telling me that, I need to go make friends with somebody.
Mm-hmm.
But as I've, kind of evolved in my thinking and understanding, and when we situate racism as a spiritual illness, right? It's a spiritual disease.
Yeah.
This act or action of building these relationships is an exercise that actually assists in the healing of our spirits, right? Where we're able to have these connections, these heart connections, and experiencing that connection with other people is necessary for us to begin to see each other truly as one human family. And so, I see it a lot differently now, and I hear it a lot differently now. I used to get mad when I hear people say that. I used to get upset thinking that, I'm like, we need to be doing something else, and you're telling me to make friends with somebody. But that is essential, right? These relationships are essential for the type of internal work that has to happen. And I wanted to say a quick thing about the whole thing you mentioned about discomfort. There's a direct quote from the Baha'i writings that says, "Seek not your own comfort and ease," right? There's no, in every religious tradition that there is, right? When we look at the life of Jesus Christ, we look at Prophet Muhammad, we look at all the messengers of God, we look at Baha'u'llah, the Baha'u'llah, the things that they went through. Baha'u'llah says, "I've consented to be bound in chains, that humanity may be released from its bondage." So it's this suffering, right? This commitment to justice that's gonna have to, is discomfort, right? We're birthing a new society, so there's going to be discomfort in this birthing, and we have to embrace that, and we have to work through it. If we claim to be people of goodwill, there's a quotation that I read recently. It says, "A personal morality is weighted on the scales of one's commitment to social justice." So you can't say, being good is not enough, right? We have to get in the mix, and we have to do the work, and it's going to be uncomfortable. But if we're in spaces where relationships have been built, as has been suggested, we're able to move through that discomfort together, knowing that this is necessary for us to bring about the change we want to see.
Yeah. And so it's funny because I personally think, I don't know, in my own personal family, maybe you all have some other experiences, but in my immediate family, all of those relationships are complicated. You know what I'm saying? I mean, there is no relationship. Exactly. There is no relationship I have ever had that doesn't have some complexity and some discomfort. In actuality, it seems to me that the going through the discomfort, the embracing of the complexity, is really, it really helps to define the relationship, the quality of the relationship. So it's an expectation that we're going to make mistakes, that we're going to trip over ourselves, that we're going to get something wrong, and I'm going to fail it, you're going to fail. But I'm here, I'm with you, we're in it together, we'll get through this together. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, brother. Ymasumac, Layli, y'all got anything y'all wanna share on that end? What are y'all thinking?
I just, super, super grateful for Anthony mentioning, even his own journey, around this, like, the concept of love and the heart, because I had a very similar journey. And I remember in my 20s when I was in college and I read, Baha'u'llah said, change one heart at a time. At that time, we had a proposition passed in California, 187, and, it was going to like not allow immigrants to have access to healthcare, education. I mean, it was just, we had English only propositions. And I just remember being in college and thinking like, we don't have time for one heart at a time. Are you kidding me? We got to like do this now. And I just remember feeling very frustrated, and over time, and of course, through a lot of discomfort and a lot of lessons, that were rough, and many continue to be. I realized, what do you have left after everything? All you have left is love. Like, that's it. That is the most transformative power I have ever been in touch with, that has completely redone everything. And I'm so grateful, because you're right, this whole notion of complexity, being somebody who comes from an indigenous background with a father who is very, very rooted in who he is, right? And then a mother from New England who is also very connected to her, English and Irish roots, it's challenging. I always describe that as like kind of walking in the middle of two like very strong oceans, right? And being like in the crash of those oceans, right? It's challenging to do that. But that complexity has so much beauty and has so many gifts to offer, right? But you have to be willing to walk it. You can't try and silence it. You can't try and mute it. And I think that as a society, systematically, that's what has been tried to be done, right? We've tried to systematically silence these complexities because they're hard. They're hard to walk through. I guess it's why I always lead with, for me personally, I want to lead with love, because that will allow me to do it. It will give me the patience to keep walking. It will give me the willingness, the desire, the drive to keep going. Otherwise, I'm gonna get tired. And I'm gonna say, this is too much, I'm out, but love keeps me going, right? Love says, no, there's more. No, it's all good, right? And so it keeps me that walk. The other thing I wanted to mention is, I was looking back at the letter and where it talks about anti-Blackness. There's in that same paragraph, it says we must build the capacity to truly hear and acknowledge the voices of those who have directly suffered from the effects of racism. This capacity should manifest itself in our schools, the media, and other civic arenas, as well as in our work and personal relations. Now, for me, that is so powerful, because one of the things that I think about when I was reading this is that, curriculum taught in schools, you can set the most fabulous, like diverse, progressive, inclusive curriculum. You can do all those things, but who teaches it? The teacher. And the teacher will teach it through their heart. Whatever is in their heart, that is exactly how they'll teach it. And so, and that's true of everything. The media, you can have all these fabulous, technology, stories, all these things, but who's going to direct these? The director will direct it through their heart. The actors will express it through their heart, right? So all of these things, the leaders in civic arenas, all of that work is done through our heart. And whatever is in our heart is what will be expressed, whether we want it to or not. And so I think that the more that I can develop this consciousness about what's in my heart and how do I root out those things that do not serve me or humanity, then when I do these other things, like the schools, like the media, right? It will manifest beauty, it will manifest, unity, and also root out the anti-Blackness, right? Because that's in my heart too. It's been systematically placed in there for over 400 years, right? And for every community, I went to school in Latin America. It's present in all of Latin America, right? This idea, it's interesting because in Latin America, often the very worst thing is to be Indian. To say eres indio is never a good thing. And I didn't grow up with that because my father always had so much pride in that, right? And so I remember when I grew up there, I thought, wow, you know, why is this such a bad thing? You know, but what I realized is that even though being Indian or being Indio is the worst, right? It's like it's at the bottom. We all knew that underneath that was Black, and we didn't even mention that because it's so not worth mentioning because it's so at the bottom. Like how despicable is that, right? That it's not even worth mentioning because we know it's already down there, right? So we'll just talk about the one that is very present, which is the indigenous community, right? But that's how anti-Blackness works, right? And so I think it's important to know that so that you can start really rooting that out, because there are many messages in Latino and Native homes of things like, well, marry within your group. And if you can't marry within your group, then you can marry a white person. But if you can't do that, then that's it. Those are your options. That's insane, right? And so these are the things that are, you know, you hear, and these are the things that you need to root out, right? Because, you know, otherwise they're going to show up. They're going to show up in the way that you interact with your children and the messages that you give them. And we can't allow that to happen if we want to move towards oneness. We just can't allow that to happen.
And I think it's a remarkable thing too that Baha'u'llah recognized that. And when he spoke of people of African descent, Black people, as the pupil of the eye through which the light shineth forth, the light of spirit shineth forth, he recognized the need to subvert the entire world system with regard to race and racism. He recognized that the unity that he was directing humanity towards would not be achievable unless and until anti-Blackness was routed from human consciousness and from all the systems of society. So, you know, the fact that that has been a consistent theme in the Baha'i writings from the middle of the 19th century all the way to now, and that, you know, it was reinforced by Shoghi Effendi in the Advent of Divine Justice when he wrote about the most vital and challenging issue. And even today, in the guidance that we get from the Universal House of Justice, that we are consistently working and consistently developing methodologies that enable the eradication, meaning pulling it out from the root of racism, of racial prejudice, of racial injustice, and substituting it with justice and unity very broadly. You know, there's a quote I really love from the letter that I want to share. I'm just going to read it. I don't know, Masud, if you already had it planned, but I love this paragraph towards the end where it says, "The oneness of humanity is the foundation of our future. Its realization is the inevitable next stage in our life on this planet. We will replace a world society based upon competition and conflict and driven by rampant materialism with one founded upon our higher potential for collaboration and reciprocity. This achievement will mark the universal coming of age of the human race. How soon we achieve this and how easily will depend upon the commitment we demonstrate to this cardinal principle." I love it because it talks about the maturation of the human race, of our universal coming of age. And it's something that we're on the brink of, and that all of this uprising that we see about racial justice and all of this conflict and all of these things that are taking us to the brink of our survival are all things that are precipitating this coming of age. You know, we know how turbulent that stage of life is when people are about to hit maturity, you know, and that's where humanity is as a whole. And I see this whole racial justice issue and the fact that these recent round of racial uprisings have lit up not just the Black and brown communities, but also the white communities, and also not just the United States, but countries all over the world. And that all kinds of people are putting Black Lives Matter in their, you know, putting signs in their yards and on their cars and on their shirts and on their masks and everywhere, showing that the entire world is fed up with anti-Blackness. And even though there are, you know, those people that are still clinging to the old world system, I think that with a touch of the heart and love, that even those communities can be turned around. That might not be a popular thing to say. I know that there are people that don't want to hear me say that, but I truly believe that there's no person that can't be brought into this community of kinship. And I believe that we have an opportunity now like we've never had before on Earth. Not only do we have these uprisings, but we have, the ability to communicate all over the world, all at once, simultaneously, and mobilize opinion and mobilize heart energy in ways we were never able to do before. And I don't want to overlook those very important things.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because we're talking about the solution to this issue, based on this guidance from the National Spiritual Assembly, in some ways very differently than the vast majority of people who are engaged in protest are. I mean, we're talking about it from the standpoint of religion playing a key role in this process. We're talking about impacting the hearts, right? We know that the movements in the 60s were primarily about political change, right? About changing laws. And of course, that work is important. But fundamentally, if somebody's heart hasn't changed, they're going to find a way if they are committed enough to skirt the law, to go around the law, to go over it or under it, and not be obedient to the law. So I'm really interested in you all's thought process on the role that religion plays. In this letter from the National Spiritual Assembly, they say religion, an enduring source of insight concerning human purpose and action, has a key role to play in this process. All faith communities recognize that we are essentially spiritual beings. All proclaim some version of the golden rule, to love others as we do ourselves. So I'm just really interested in what you all are thinking in terms of the effectiveness of religion in helping to change hearts and bringing about this fundamental, deep-rooted change that we're talking about.
Yeah, two words you said within that quote. You said the word purpose and action, right? So I see religion, right? It provides, right, this sense of purpose, right? They're the principles, the values, those spiritual concepts that fuel, right? That are supposed to fuel our desire to act. And so I think the role of religion is for, us to ensure that we're translating our principles into practice, right? We can look at the history of movements. You look at the Civil Rights Movement, where they had the Christian Foundation that motivated Dr. King and others that were involved in that movement. It was in putting the practices of Christianity into action. And we look at it in terms of the broad population of Christians. That group was a minority of the Christian population. You see, everybody wasn't out there. Everybody wasn't looking at the teachings in that way and enacting them in that way. And we look at every faith. Every faith has admonished its believers to identify with those who are dispossessed, right? To identify with the downtrodden. Right, in the Baha'i writings it says being upholder and defender of the victims of oppression. Remind the wealthy of the midnight, remind the rich of the midnight sign of the poor. And so this should be at the front of our minds. As I said earlier, if we claim to believe these things, then we must be doers of the word, right? In the Bible it says Moses was a doer of the word. We have to do. Right? Baha'u'llah says that deeds, not words, be your adorning. We can talk about the oneness of humanity all day, but as the letter says, it creates a moral imperative for us to act. It says, he whose your words exceed your deeds, your death is more precious than your life. So we got to enact religion. It cannot be just something that we espouse.
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day. There's another presentation that I'm preparing for, and when I bring in spirituality, it's in an educational arena, and people get nervous, and they said, we can't really talk about it. And I said, look, that is the issue. The issue is that words like religion and spirituality have been used in these systems of oppression, and so now people cannot use them for what they were intended for, which is transformation. So if we're going to talk about social justice, if we're going to talk about eliminating racial prejudice, you cannot talk about that without talking about religion and spirituality. There's no way. And so that itself is the issue, right? So if you want to say we need to dismantle these systems of oppression, then you have to take back some of the words that they took and try to reorient and give them back their true destination, right? So, Baha'u'llah talks about divine revelations, and he says, is it not the purpose of every divine revelation to affect a transformation in the whole character of humanity? Right? A transformation that will affect both its inner and outer reality. That's the deal. Every divine revelation came to transform humanity. And so transformation is not pretty. I don't know if you're all seen a caterpillar when it's inside a little cocoon. It doesn't look pretty when it's going to try and become that butterfly. Things get dismantled, it gets mushy, it's gross, right? That transformation is not always a pretty process, right? But in that process of moving through transformation, that's where your spiritual muscles get developed. Your faith, the ability to remember the truth about who you are, the ability to remember the truth about who others are, right? You change the way you actually walk this world, right? So if we're going to try and, transform society in this new framework for justice, there is no way you can do that without calling on a higher source that comes through these divine revelations. There's no way, right? And so I think Anthony was referencing, all of these powerful manifestations of God, right? Jesus Christ, Prophet Muhammad, right? The Buddha, right? You look at their lives were transformative, right? Their lives depicted that transformation, as did Baha'u'llah's, as did the Bab, right? And so for us, right, we also then need to think of, how do I allow this spirit of this faith to transform who I am, right? And the way that I kind of my little barometer around that is, if everything in my life looks the same, then I've not allowed transformation to happen, right? My relationship with my husband should have shifted, my children, the way that I do things, how I walk, the way I spend my time, the way I organize my day, everything should be shifting. And what it should be shifting towards is closer towards love, right? Love, it has to be closer towards love, right? I have to be willing to forgive a lot easier. If I'm not doing that, I still got a lot more transformation to go. And those things, just referencing back to what we mentioned earlier in terms of, wanting systematic change now, which I understand, because me too. I mean, I understand that, being tired and just saying, gosh, that 400 years, can we do it now, right? I understand that feeling. When you change the heart, you have no idea the reverberations of what that is going to cause, because hearts, which belong to people, create systems. So that what I wanted when I was in college, I wanted systemic change. By changing hearts, those systems change. So I should be really interested in ensuring that all those principles of the educational system, all those teachers of the educational system, all those wardens of the prison system, their hearts need to change, because when their hearts change, those systems will radically change. There's no way a warden of a prison system will endure serving in that position, knowing the oneness of humanity truly in his heart. There's no way he would put any human being that is noble in nature in a cage. There is no way he would do that. So those systems would radically change, right? And so for me, today I realize that's the deal. That's the deal. We want to shift hearts, right? And we have a systematic way of doing that today. And thankfully we have technology, which allows us to really push forward in a way that we've never had before. It's unprecedented. It's so exciting.
I would add to that I think that there's also another piece of work that religion does, and that is constantly reminding us about the presence of spiritual reality against the backdrop of our materialist or materially centered everyday lives. There's so much consciousness and power that come from the spiritual dimension of life and of reality. It's easy to forget about it, and there are some systems of belief now that virtually negate it. But I think that religion is always there to remind humanity that we have a spiritual dimension, that we are spiritual beings, as the letter states, that there is a spiritual reality beyond this material world to which we are connected and to which all of earth is connected. And it reminds us to, even though it's a mystery, to keep pursuing it and to stay connected to it, and to help us understand that it is also a fundamental foundation of our unity. You know, this unity that exists, even though we are obscuring it with our lack of awareness, and you know, the other ways that we interfere with its realization, it is fundamentally spiritually rooted, you know? And so religion is always there to give us information about that reality, to remind us about that reality, to remind us who we are, to remind us that we're spiritual beings.
Wow, thank you all so much, man. We could go on like this for the rest of the day, and certainly the letter, as we have just really scratched the surface, will require multiple readings and meditation. I encourage our audience, if you have not obtained a copy of this letter, to do so. It really bears some deep consideration, deep dives, and is very revealing in terms of where we are and where we are going as a human family, one human family. I want to just bring our attention back as we kind of come to the end of this time together. At the end of the letter, they talk about this process of transformation is a choice, and we are challenged to choose. And they say, we have come to a moment of great public awareness. This is the National Spiritual Assembly again, and rejection of injustice. Let us not lose this opportunity. We will commit to the process of forming a more perfect, will we commit to the process of forming a perfect union? Will we be guided by the better angels of our nature to choose the course of wisdom, of courage, and of unity? Will we choose to truly become that city upon a hill to serve as inspiration to all humanity? Let us then join hands with each other in commitment to the path of justice. Together we can surely achieve this. So this is our choice. This is our call to action. And each of us individually and collectively, hopefully, are lending our share to this process. I just want to thank, our guests today, Ymasumac Maran Davis and Dr. Anthony Outler. Thank you all for your wisdom, your insight, for contributing to this program. You have been invaluable participants today. Also, my brilliant and insightful co-hosts, Dr. Layli Maparyan, who I'm really honored to be sharing this platform with, and we'll be doing this dance again for at least 2 more times in this series. And I also want to let our audience know that we will in the future be unpacking the recent letter from the Universal House of Justice about the issue of race, which has been addressed to the American Baha'i community. And just as a little bit of a teaser, I'm going to leave you with a quote from that letter. And this quote is on the power of love to effect transformation. They say, ultimately, the power to transform the world is effected by love. Love originating from the relationship with the divine. Love ablaze among the members of a community. Love extended without restriction to every human being. This divine love, ignited by the word of God, is disseminated by enkindled souls through intimate conversations that create new susceptibilities in human hearts, open minds to moral persuasion, and loosen the hold of biased norms and social systems so that they can gradually take on a new form in keeping with the requirements of humanity's age of maturity. You are channels for this divine love. Let it flow through you to all who cross your path. Infuse it into every neighborhood and social space in which you move to build capacity to canalize the society-building power of Baha'u'llah's revelation. There can be no rest until the destined outcome is achieved. From the Universal House of Justice. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time. Have a wonderful day, everybody.